Using Blender, I want to show how to take a highly detailed 3D model and to create a low poly version of it. To do that, I'm going to first turn on the statistics overlay here, which will show how much detail is in the model. A second overlay that I think is helpful is to add the wireframe option, and then I can see all the wireframe details over the surface of the model and see how complex, how many vertices and edges this model has. I'm going to duplicate this model by typing Shift-D and typing Y to constrain that duplicate on the Y-axis. Next, I'm going to go over to the modifier panel and add a Decimate Modifier. There is a slider, but I am going to type in a value like 0.1 to just quickly reduce this way down to about 1/10 what it was before in terms of its complexity and detail. You can see that's made a very significant change to the look of this model, and I can click Apply to make that permanent. And I'm going to make another copy of this and kind of just keep going down the line with the same process. So again, I'm going to go over to Add Modifier. I'm going to select Decimate. And now it is a little bit easier to use this as a slider because the computer can keep up with this because it has so many fewer vertices and edges, faces. So I can kind of play around with this, and I'm going to click Apply. And I'm going to repeat this process. And you can see already that this has really changed from something that's highly detailed to something that starts to feel a little bit like we can make out some of the individual polygons, triangles within it. So again, going to the Decimate Modifier, just repeating this process. And at this point, really trying to keep an eye on what this looks like and to try and notice the different details as they sort of appear and disappear. So you can see how this has evolved, and I am going to keep on adding more of these and pushing this a little bit further just to see kind of step by step what this looks like as it gets gradually more of a low poly look about it. So again, using the Decimate Modifier, playing with that, moving it back and forth, just trying to see what happens to this form as we go along. And in the Decimate Modifier, you can see it has a face count. So right now that has about 576 faces. And when we began, there were hundreds of thousands of faces in this model. So it is very substantially reduced from what it was. Going to click Apply and just going to continue on with this process. And sometimes I use this as sort of a sculptural effect, and I'm never quite sure when I start exactly how low poly would be enough. And so I do like to kind of make these in a line so that I can kind of compare and contrast as we go along. And since there's already several of these and I want to just make examples like I'm making little sketches here, I feel like it might not be a bad idea to just take it a little bit too far, to have one or two examples that maybe no longer resemble the original object enough that have just gone a little bit too far. So just taking my time to kind of find a shape that I find interesting here that might still resemble the original fire hydrant object. And when I've done that, again, I can select Apply. And maybe I will make one last one that is less recognizable. And now you can see them all together. And I'm going to turn off the wireframe overlay and kind of pan across. And you can see how these gradually go from highly detailed to very much a sort of low poly design, and ultimately to something that maybe only marginally resembles the original object. And so out of all of these, I'm going to choose this one, the sort of third one from the right, and I'm going to turn off the visibility on all the others. And I've just got this one to work with. And at this point, I may want to do a few more sort of manual tweaks to this to get rid of areas like this little loop underneath the fire hydrant where there are some extra faces. And at this point, I'm going to speed up the video a little bit, and basically what I'm doing here is just manually adjusting things. I'm trying to simplify the model a little bit, but also remove any sections or items that seem to kind of confuse the form that would just make it, that just kind of clutter it up. So I want to have the fewest faces possible and still be able to resemble the shape. And so in this case, I am going back in and kind of rebuilding a few of these things bit by bit, using the edit mode in Blender, and in some cases merging these vertices together, in other cases adding faces where needed, filling little gaps that I may have created by accident, and making adjustments as I go along. I do want this to have a flat base, so a nice trick for that is to select all the faces and to do Scale Z and type a value of 0, and that will take all of those selected faces and flatten them out into one plane. So that's Scale Z 0. And then the rest of what I'm doing here is just gradually simplifying the form to make it a little bit more cohesive, and trying to, where I can, bring the shape back a little bit closer to what the original was in this low poly form, and to make it feel a little bit more like the original fire hydrant form. And I've sped this up a lot towards the end, but at this point I was just making a lot of last minute edits to this, just changing the form a little bit and trying to simplify where possible to have the fewest number of faces and still have it resemble the original form that we began with. So once I'm happy with that, I can go ahead and save the model and be done with converting this from a very highly detailed model to something that is a very low poly version of itself.